Welcome to the debate. Imagine just for a second trying to have a really deeply nuanced, high-stakes debate with a colleague. You know, you were trying to parse out complex ideas, you're reading their facial expressions.
Right, jumping in when you get that sudden spark of inspiration.
Exactly. Now, I want you to imagine trying to do all of that, but with a 3-second audio delay, a pixelated video feed that basically freezes every single time someone makes a good point, and the looming, just incredibly stressful anxiety that your prepaid data plan is about to run out mid-sentence.
Yeah, that sounds like an absolute nightmare, honestly.
It is, and today we are looking at the realities of global online education through that exact lens. Specifically, we're diving into this fascinating 2025 study by Appianing et al. That looked at higher education in post-COVID-19 Ghana. We are going to look at what happens when the very concept of a classroom gets pushed to its absolute breaking point.
And it really is a breaking point because, moving a classroom online doesn't just change the medium. It fundamentally alters the cultural and instructional dynamics of how knowledge is actually shared between human beings.
Yeah, precisely. And to measure that, the researchers use something called the community of inquiry framework, which...
Oh, I love that framework.
Right? It's an incredibly useful model because it doesn't just treat online learning as this one big monolithic bucket. It divides the online educational experience into 4 distinct pillars. So you have teaching presence, which is basically the architecture, building the syllabus, guiding the course. Then emotional presence, making students feel cared for and seen.
Yep. And then cognitive presence, which is that actual spark of learning, critical thinking, the debate. And finally, social presence, creating that feeling that you are part of a real peer group, not just, an avatar on a screen.
Exactly. And the central tension that we are unpacking today really emerges from a massive discrepancy in how those 4 pillars held up in this study. The researchers found that instructors in this Ghanaian environment actually established really high levels of teaching and emotional presence, but their ability to foster cognitive and social presence just completely tanked.
Right. They just couldn't get students to connect deeply with the material or, frankly, with each other.
Yeah, and looking closely at the environment, I see a blatant infrastructure problem here. I'm going to argue that this deficit in cognitive and social presence is overwhelmingly driven by the hard structural and technological barriers that are inherent to developing nations. You can't build a complex social environment on a fragile digital foundation.
I hear you. I really do. But honestly, I see an instructional and cultural hurdle here. I believe these deficits stem fundamentally from pedagogy. It's really about regional cultural norms, specifically the difficulty of moving from traditional authoritarian teaching styles to student-centered learning, which is, it's a much, much harder shift than simply handing someone a better Wi-Fi router.
Well, let's really get into the numbers here because what makes this study so compelling is how they track the behavior. Instead of just looking at broad averages, they use something called Latent Profile Analysis.
Right, the LPA.
Yeah. Basically, this is just a statistical way to look for hidden clusters of people who behave similarly. And when they ran the numbers, they found that a massive majority of these instructors, like 65.3% to be exact, fell into what the researchers labeled the promising category.
Right. And promising meaning they aren't ignoring the students. They are actively attempting to perform all 4 of those roles we mentioned.
Exactly. The effort is demonstrably there. They really want to connect, but they fail to create any real depths of engagement. Now, when I look at that 65.3% sitting in that middle tier, unable to break through, I see a hard technological ceiling.
A ceiling?
Yeah, because we have to think about what is actually happening on the ground in sub-Saharan Africa. We are talking about incredibly expensive cellular data, wildly fluctuating internet connectivity, and power grids that can just drop without warning. You cannot have real-time, synchronous engagement, the kind of rapid-fire back and forth that deep social and cognitive presence absolutely requires in that kind of environment.
See, I come at it from a completely different way. I think that putting all the blame on the technology turns the broadband connection into a very, very convenient scapegoat for deeper, far more complex pedagogical problems.
A scapegoat? That's a bit harsh, don't you think?
Well, hear me out. We have to look at another data point from this exact same study. Emotional presence was rated incredibly high by the students. It got a mean score of 3.85 out of 5. It was literally second only to teaching presence, which was at 4.03. Now think about that. If technological barriers and bandwidth issues were these totally insurmountable culprits, building an emotional human connection would be just as heavily impaired.
I'm not sure that tracks.
It has to track. If the internet is broken, it's broken, but it isn't completely impairing emotional connection. So the failure to get students to debate and socialize isn't about the hardware.
Then what is it about?
It is about a massive structural shift away from the authoritarian, teacher-centered approaches that are very common in non-Western and collectivist cultures. Asking an instructor to fundamentally restructure their identity, like to go from being the absolute authority figure at the front of a physical room to being a quiet facilitator of peer-to-peer inquiry on a screen, that is a profound psychological shift.
Sure, it's difficult.
It's so much harder to achieve than simply upgrading their internet speed.
Okay, I see why you think that pedagogy is the primary barrier, but let me give you a different perspective, focusing on the actual mechanics of the digital interface itself. Let's look at what keeps that 65.3% of promising instructors from reaching the ideal tier.
Go ahead.
Here are skills that demand a real-time, uninterrupted flow. Think about how you manage conflict in a physical room. You need to be able to read the room. You need to pick up on micro-expressions in a video feed, sense the tension, and, intervene organically before someone gets defensive. You literally cannot do that if the video is lagging by 2 seconds.
I mean, sure, lag is annoying, but
It's not just annoying, it kills the spontaneity. Cognitive presence relies on the rapid-fire exchange of ideas. Someone makes a point, someone else immediately jumps in to refine it. But when you introduce even a half second of internet lag, people start talking over each other. They get embarrassed, they apologize, and eventually everyone just goes quiet.
right. I've been in those Zoom meetings.
Exactly. Expecting these instructors to build deep cognitive presence without proper digital tools is, well, it's like asking a master architect to build a cathedral using only a hammer.
Okay, that's quite an image.
But it works, right? Sure, the architect knows exactly where every stone should go, and they understand the theory of a flying buttress perfectly. The expertise is there, the intent is there, but the tool fundamentally limits the execution. The medium dictates the interaction.
That is a compelling argument, and I do love the cathedral analogy. But have you considered the instructors who are successfully building those cathedrals right now in the exact same environment?
What do you mean?
Well, the latent profile analysis didn't just find that promising group. It also identified that 18.8% of the instructors achieved the ideal profile. That is nearly 1 in 5 instructors. Now, these ideal instructors are operating in the exact same technological reality in Ghana. They are facing the same data costs, dealing with the exact same power grid, and the same connectivity fluctuations.
Wait, but are they?
Yes, they are, in the exact same institutional framework. Yet the study explicitly states that these ideal instructors successfully utilize brainstorming, they facilitate meaningful, deep discussions, and they actually adapt their planned activities based on group feedback. They foster a deep sense of community.
Okay, but let me just finish this thought. If the technological ceiling is as hard and impenetrable as you suggest, like if the hammer makes the cathedral impossible, this 18.8% simply should not exist. Their existence proves that the barrier is instructional skill and pedagogical adaptability. It proves that cognitive and social presence can be achieved through mastery of the digital medium, even when it's constrained.
Yeah, I'm just not convinced by that line of reasoning because you are treating the technological environment as perfectly uniform for every user, which, it rarely is.
How so? Even within the exact same country or the exact same university, access to stable internet and advanced hardware varies wildly based on socioeconomic status, urban versus rural geography, and frankly, institutional funding. That 18.8% might simply represent the subset of instructors and their students, by the way, who happen to have access to the optimal side of the digital divide.
I think that's a bit of an assumption, but okay.
Well, I want to pivot to the paradox you raised earlier, because to me, this is genuinely the most fascinating part of the data. How do we explain the fact that emotional presence thrives, scoring that really impressive 3.85, while social and cognitive presences utterly falter.
Yes, that paradox is the absolute crux of the issue. And I think the explanation lies completely in the cultural framework of the classroom itself. The study brings up a critical point about non-Western contexts. In many of these regions, including Ghana, you have a high level of collectivism paired with traditional authoritarian teaching methods.
So how does that actually play out in a live classroom setting, though?
Well, think about what it means to be a student in a highly collectivist, authoritarian educational culture. You are taught from a very young age to revere the teacher. You do not question them publicly because doing so might cause them to lose face, which, disrupts social harmony.
Right.
The instructor's role is basically to deliver knowledge and provide care. That paradigm aligns perfectly with high teaching presence and high emotional presence. The teacher lectures, and the teacher supports the student emotionally during a crisis, like a global pandemic. That feels natural to them.
Okay, I follow that.
But cognitive presence, that requires critical discourse. It requires students to question the material, to verify meaning, and often to challenge the instructor or even debate each other.
Right, which inherently creates friction.
Exactly. And social presence requires horizontal interactivity, where students feel they are an equal part of a community. Now, suddenly, you're in a Zoom breakout room. The software assigns everyone a perfectly equal-sized square on the screen. It demands horizontal equality, but the ingrained culture demands vertical hierarchy.
Ah, I see what you're saying.
Creating that trusting, highly interactive, horizontal, cognitive space online fundamentally clashes with a vertical, authoritarian cultural norm. The friction isn't bandwidth. The friction is cultural.
Look, I see why you draw that conclusion. It paints a really compelling psychological picture. But I look at the very same paradox and I see a purely mechanical explanation.
Mechanical? Really?
Yes, we have to look at how these specific presences are actually enacted through a digital interface. Think about it. Teaching presence can be achieved almost entirely asynchronously. An instructor can upload a recorded lecture while they have good internet. They post a meticulously structured syllabus and provide static reading materials. It takes time, but it doesn't take real-time bandwidth.
Sure, the administrative side of teaching can be asynchronous.
And similarly, emotional presence can be maintained asynchronously. An instructor can send caring, supportive emails. They can post an empathetic announcement saying, "I know the pandemic is hard. Take an extra 3 days on this assignment." They can check in on a student via a text-based platform.
Right.
None of those things require high sustained bandwidth. They take literally 0 megabytes per second to execute well.
Oh, I think you are vastly underestimating what emotional presence really is.
But wait, let me just contrast that with social and cognitive presences. The study explicitly notes that bringing a sense of deep cognitive activity is incredibly difficult to do simply by staying connected online. Why? Because it demands synchronous tools.
It doesn't absolutely require.
It does. It absolutely requires live breakout rooms, real-time collaborative whiteboards, live polling, and seamless video conferencing so you can actually read the room. Those are massive data sinks. So the fact that asynchronous friendly presences succeed while synchronous dependent presences fail perfectly reflects a hard technological deficit. It's a hardware issue dressed up as a psychological one.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. Emotional presence is not just sending a mass email saying, "I hope you are doing well." That is a fundamental misunderstanding of the community of inquiry framework.
How so?
According to the framework, emotional presence is a highly responsive mode. It involves showing deep empathy, reading the room, and reacting to students' emotions and frustrations in a real-time way that builds a trustful atmosphere.
But they can do that via text or delayed video, can't they?
Doing it effectively without the implicit in-person facial cues we rely on in a physical classroom requires profound pedagogical effort. It requires a teacher who is actively monitoring the emotional state of their students and deliberately adjusting their approach. If an instructor can clear that incredibly high bar of emotional and pedagogical adaptability online, it shows they have the inherent capacity to connect and read their students.
Okay, so why doesn't it translate to cognitive presence?
The reason they don't apply that exact same adaptability to cognitive and social presence isn't because their router is broken. It is because they haven't been trained to shift their instructional design from a teacher-centered model to a student-centered one. They literally don't know how to design a task that forces peer-to-peer collaboration without feeling like they are losing control of the classroom.
Okay, well, if we want to talk about how this actually plays out for the students themselves, this study gives us a very telling metric regarding the uniformity of their experience.
Ah, yes, the demographic data.
Right. The researchers looked for variations in how students evaluated this instructor presence, specifically breaking it down by demographic factors like gender. And what they found was that there was absolutely no significant difference based on student gender.
Right, the p-value was 0.075.
Exactly. For those who aren't statistical nerds, a p-value of 0.075 means the difference is statistically insignificant. Statistically speaking, men and women were having the exact same educational experience in these online classrooms. Now, in the realm of technology and digital equity, especially in developing nations, literature historically shows massive gender variations in ICT access, meaning, access to computers, internet, and digital skills.
That is true. The digital divide usually does have a very strong gendered component.
Right. So the fact that male and female students reported encountering the exact same distributive patterns of instructor presence is highly revealing. If the tech floor wasn't the absolute bottom, you would expect the male students, who typically have better digital access in these regions, to report higher cognitive presence because they could actually load the breakout rooms.
But they didn't.
But they didn't. To me, this uniformity proves that the hard technological barriers are so foundational, so rock bottom, that they create a universally constrained environment. It doesn't matter who you are or what your baseline access is. If the overall bandwidth of the platform isn't there to support a breakout room, you aren't getting a breakout room. The technology acts as a great, albeit unfortunate, equalizer.
It is so funny. I read that exact same p-value and arrive at the complete opposite conclusion.
Really? How?
Think about your logic. If technology were the primary variable dictating the experience, we would expect to see differences precisely because access to hardware and data falls along socioeconomic and gender lines.
Well, yeah, that's what
The fact that the experience is completely uniform, that male and female students evaluate these presences identically, proves that they are not reacting to their own individual internet speeds. They're reacting to an overarching pedagogical culture that is being applied equally to the entire class.
I'm not sure I follow that jump.
Because a lecture is a lecture, regardless of your download speed. If a teacher uses an authoritarian, lecture-heavy style that ignores social presence and doesn't invite debate, that style is applied universally to everyone logged into the session. The students are uniformly rating the instructor's methodology. If the teacher isn't trying to foster cognitive presence, it doesn't matter if the student has fiber optic internet or a 3G cell phone. The uniformity is cultural.
Okay, which brings us to the ultimate question for university administrators, right? How do institutions actually solve this?
That's the million-dollar question. If we view this through the lens of a structural deficit, as I do, the solution clearly aligns with the study's primary call for targeted investment in the virtual classroom environment itself. We need to invest in the interactive tech. The study specifically highlights the necessity of utilizing synchronous learning technologies.
But throwing tech at the problem...
Let me finish. We need robust versions of Zoom, stable breakout rooms, integrated live polling, and digital whiteboards that don't just, crash the system. If we want instructors to move past the promising stage and actually facilitate that high-level, rapid-fire cognitive discourse, we have to put the right tools in their hands. You cannot ask an instructor to foster real-time collaboration if the platform they are forced to use barely supports a basic text forum. Okay, but providing a sophisticated tool does not automatically impart the skill to use it effectively. You could give every single instructor in Ghana a premium enterprise Zoom account and a state-of-the-art digital whiteboard tomorrow, and I guarantee you the cognitive and social presence scores would remain completely stagnant if you do not change their teaching philosophy.
You don't think they'd even experiment with the new tools?
They might, but they would use them to deliver better lectures, not to foster debate. The study heavily emphasizes an alternative recommendation, which I find far more crucial. training in emotional intelligence, empathy, and community formation.
I mean, training's always good, but
Institutions need to invest in professional development that directly targets these deeply ingrained instructional habits. Instructors need to be taught how to design a digital environment where students feel safe enough to challenge ideas. They need to learn the psychological skill of stepping back, being quiet, and letting the students lead the discourse. That is a cultural retraining. It is about fundamentally rewiring how an educator views their own authority. That is not a software update.
Well, as we synthesize these arguments, I look at the reality of the situation and I just see an undeniable structural bottleneck. When 65.3% of your instructors are classified as promising, meaning they possess the drive, they have the empathy, and they are actively attempting to create all four presences, but are falling short specifically on the most complex real-time interactions, it points to a systemic ceiling.
A ceiling you think is purely digital?
Yes, without fundamentally resolving the digital infrastructure deficits and without providing equitable access to the synchronous, high-bandwidth tools required for deep social and cognitive inquiry, these instructors will remain capped. I maintain that you simply cannot innovate your way out of a fundamentally constrained medium.
And I maintain that the medium is only as constrained as the methodology you apply to it. The evidence from this study clearly shows that emotional connection, which is, a highly nuanced, delicate human interaction, survived and even thrived in this exact same digital environment.
Sure.
The fact that cognitive and social presences fail to take root points to a massive friction between the horizontal demands of online collaborative learning and the vertical realities of traditional authoritarian pedagogical cultures, until academic institutions prioritize shifting those frameworks towards genuine student-centered engagement and actively train their faculty to relinquish total control of the cognitive space, no amount of technological investment will magically foster deep critical inquiry.
well, despite our different lenses on the root cause, whether it is the bandwidth or the methodology, I think we have actually arrived at a very clear point of convergence regarding the path forward here. Because we both agree on the study's ultimate pragmatic conclusion. Higher education institutions cannot simply sit around and wait for national grid conditions to improve, nor can they wait for generational cultural shifts to happen on their own.
No, they can't.
They must invest heavily and immediately in targeted professional development.
Absolutely. And that professional development has to be deeply integrated. It has to blend the hard digital literacy required to operate advanced virtual platforms with the advanced pedagogical training required to design student-centered collaborative learning experiences. You simply cannot separate the tool from the technique.
Right. It addresses both the technological reality and the pedagogical necessity simultaneously. It really highlights the sheer complexity of adapting traditional higher education into the virtual sphere. It is never just a matter of turning on a webcam and reading from a textbook.
Definitely not.
For those interested in the mechanics of how we connect online, the source material offers even more incredible insights, particularly into how that high emotional presence actually serves as a vital bridge, keeping students engaged and motivated when the cognitive elements fail.
It is a fascinating dynamic. Seeing how educators adapt their emotional intelligence to a digital interface leaves us with a lot of lingering questions about the true nature of our digital classrooms.
It really does. It brings us all the way back to that initial idea of distance. As we look at the future of global online education, we have to ask ourselves, is the true distance we need to bridge measured in megabytes, latency, and fiber optic cables? Or is it the profound psychological space between traditional authority and genuine, collaborative human inquiry? That is something for all of us to think about next time we log into a virtual room.